The courtroom was quiet, eerily so. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the shuffle of papers, the occasional cough from someone in the back. But the tension was palpable, thick, suffocating. No one spoke, but everyone was waiting for something to break. Something big. Something that would tip the scales in this seemingly endless battle. And in that moment, it felt like the entire world was holding its breath. Elon Musk stood at the front of the room, eyes locked forward, his posture rigid but his mind racing. Today wasn't just another day in court. It was the day that could change everything, his career, his reputation, and, perhaps most importantly, his empire. How did he get here? A man who had revolutionized industries, turned failures into innovations, and made headlines for nearly every controversial decision he'd ever made. Musk had always lived on the edge, thrived in chaos, and seemed to bend the rules of reality with each bold step he took. But now, for the first time, the stakes were higher than ever. The media had been relentless. Headlines screamed betrayal, scandal, and deceit. The world's richest man was suddenly facing accusations that could tear apart everything he had worked for. This court case wasn't just about business, it was about survival. What happens when your entire world is on the line? Elon thought to himself as the judge entered the room. His eyes flickered towards the gallery of spectators. Journalists, lawyers, friends, and foes alike were all gathered, ready to witness the latest chapter in the never-ending saga that was Elon Musk. Elon wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. Throughout his career, he had often been the one challenging the world's status quo, shaking up the system. But today, the world was shaking him. And that realization hit him harder than any test of ingenuity or technology ever had. For the first time, he was in the fight of his life, and losing wasn't an option. As the judge settled into their seat and the proceedings began, a feeling of dread washed over him. He knew the odds were stacked against him. His opponent wasn't just another rival business mogul, it was an ex-business partner, someone who knew Musk's weaknesses, his secrets, his vulnerabilities. A former ally turned adversary who had one goal, to destroy Musk. It wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. Elon's legal team had been working non-stop, combing through millions of pages of documents, preparing counterarguments for every attack. But nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold. As the plaintiff's lawyer began his opening statement, something unexpected happened. Elon felt his phone vibrate in his pocket, a signal from his chief counsel, Sarah. She was giving him the signal, it was time for the first shocking move. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The words echoed in his mind as he caught his reflection in the glass pane in front of him. Elon took a slow, deliberate breath. His pulse quickened. The game had begun. Just as the plaintiff's lawyer was laying out his case, accusing Musk of fraud, breach of trust, and a series of financial manipulations, Elon stood up. The room fell into a sudden silence. Even the judge seemed taken aback. This wasn't normal protocol. But then again, Elon Musk was anything but normal. I would like to make an immediate motion, Elon said, his voice cutting through the tension like a hot knife through butter. A ripple of confusion swept through the room. It wasn't usual for the defendant to speak so early in proceedings, let alone make a motion. But that's what made Elon Musk, well, Elon Musk. The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. Mr. Musk, this is highly irregular. I know, Elon said, holding up a hand, but I think it's time we cut the theatrics and get to the heart of this. The courtroom fell silent. Musk was famous for thinking outside the box, for doing the unexpected. But no one could have predicted what came next. Elon walked over to the desk in front of him, opened a briefcase, and pulled out a stack of papers. The papers weren't just any papers, they were a series of private emails, confidential memos, and financial records that had been carefully prepared for just such a moment. The look of disbelief on the plaintiff's lawyer's face was priceless. It wasn't just that Elon had evidence, it was that the evidence he was presenting didn't just exonerate him, it implicated his ex-partner in a series of illegal activities that no one had seen coming. These documents, Elon began, holding them up for everyone to see, prove that my former partner had been engaging in activities far worse than anything I've been accused of. Fraud, manipulation, insider trading, the works. The gasps from the gallery were almost deafening. The courtroom was thrown into chaos as people rushed to flip through the pages. For a moment, it felt like the entire trial had just shifted on its axis. Elon returned to his seat, his face calm. But inside, a storm was raging. He had just made his first move, and it was a gamble. If the court bought it, if the jury believed what they were seeing, he had just delivered a blow that could turn the tide of the entire trial. But that was only the beginning. This is just one part of the plan, Musk thought as he glanced at his legal team. They knew the stakes, and they knew how much this case meant to their boss. But none of them could have foreseen the impact of that one shocking decision. Musk wasn't just playing the game, he was rewriting the rules. What would happen next? Was it enough to win over the jury? Would his bold move backfire? As the proceedings continued, the question hung in the air, would Elon Musk really win this trial? The courtroom was about to find out. Before Elon Musk became the face of electric cars, space exploration, and cutting-edge technologies, he was a boy who felt the sting of failure just like anyone else. His childhood wasn't one of privilege, despite what many might assume looking at him now. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa, Elon was always the outsider. A kid who seemed to live inside his own mind, dreaming up things that didn't always align with what the world expected of him. His parents, both highly intelligent but separated when Elon was young, shaped his worldview. His father, Elon Musk, was an engineer and entrepreneur, a man who'd seen success but was also emotionally distant. His mother, May, was a model and dietitian, strong, determined, and loving, but she, too, had her own struggles. Elon's parents' divorce left a mark on him that he never truly healed from. He often spoke about how the separation affected his perception of trust, relationships, and, later on, business partnerships. From a young age, Elon was obsessed with technology. At the age of 12, he taught himself programming and sold a computer game called Blaster for $500. A small accomplishment, but it was the spark that ignited his passion. The drive to build something bigger, something that could change the world, was there from the start. However, his journey to success wasn't easy. Like any entrepreneur, Musk faced his fair share of failures, many of which weren't as public as they are now. He dropped out of Stanford after just 2 days, choosing to dive into the world of technology instead of staying in academia. His first startup, Zip2, was a failure in its early stages, until it wasn't. Musk and his brother Kimball sold it to Compaq for $307 million in 1999. The money was enough to get him started on the next big venture, X.com, which would eventually become PayPal. But even with his newfound wealth, Musk's life wasn't without its challenges. It wasn't just the relentless pace of work or the pressure to succeed. Musk's reputation began to stir controversy. People who worked with him described him as tough, demanding, sometimes even impossible to please. Yet, they couldn't deny that Musk had an uncanny ability to push people beyond their limits, bringing out the best in them, even when they hated him for it. In 2008, when the world was sinking into a financial crisis, Musk was on the brink of losing everything. Tesla was nearly bankrupt, and SpaceX had just suffered a catastrophic failure with its first launch. It seemed like the man who could create rockets and cars was destined to be crushed by the weight of his own ambition. At one point, Musk was forced to take money from his own pocket to keep both companies alive, borrowing money to pay his rent. The press was relentless in its portrayal of him as the tech world's failure, a man on the edge of ruin. But Musk never gave up. In the face of adversity, he doubled down, convinced that he was on the verge of a revolution. The turning point came in 2008 when SpaceX finally launched its Falcon 1 rocket successfully, followed by a breakthrough with Tesla's Model S. Slowly, the world began to see the genius behind Musk's ideas, and the failures of the past started to fade into the background. But even as Musk found success in the world of tech, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had become the face of Silicon Valley, a man who was constantly in the media's eye. He was lauded as a visionary, praised for his revolutionary companies, but there was always another side to him that few saw. Beneath the polished exterior, Musk had a deep well of doubts and insecurities that he kept hidden. The constant pressure, the weight of the world's expectations, the reality of running multiple billion-dollar companies, it took its toll. Despite his monumental achievements, Musk still struggled to trust others. He was often described as stubborn, laser-focused, and unwilling to back down when he believed in something. These traits served him well in business but weren't always helpful in his personal relationships. Throughout the years, Musk's marriages faltered, and his friendships were tested. It wasn't just his personal life that took a hit, his reputation often did as well. The media loved to tear him down, to pick apart every decision, every move, even every tweet. Elon's relationship with the public had always been tumultuous. The more successful he became, the more divided opinions were about him. Some saw him as a modern-day genius, while others criticized him for being reckless. The controversy surrounding his decisions, especially with Tesla's stock price fluctuations, his occasional controversial tweets, and his ambitions that seemed almost too big to be real, was never far from the headlines. But for every critic, there was a loyal following that believed in him. In the months leading up to this trial, Musk had been at the center of yet another media storm. The accusations against him, fraud, abuse of power, and manipulation of Tesla's stock price, seemed like a mirror image of the controversies that had always surrounded him. He was no stranger to public battles, but this time felt different. The stakes were higher, and the people against him seemed more determined to take him down. But if there was one thing Musk had proven time and time again, it was that he could overcome the odds. The road to this courtroom had been long, filled with setbacks, betrayals, and seemingly insurmountable challenges. Yet here he was, facing what seemed like the ultimate test of his career. And as much as the world had watched his successes and failures unfold in real time, there was one thing they hadn't seen, the determination that burned within him. The desire to prove that no matter what happened, no matter how high the stakes, Elon Musk would not be defeated. Not this time. Not ever. As Musk sat in the courtroom, waiting for the next move in this legal battle, he reflected on how far he'd come. From the young boy in South Africa to the billionaire at the center of the tech world, every failure, every triumph had led him to this moment. This was more than just a court case. It was the culmination of years of relentless determination, innovation, and, above all, the desire to win against all odds. And win, he would. The days following Elon Musk's explosive courtroom revelation were a whirlwind. The media buzzed with headlines about the shocking documents he had presented. Some called it a brilliant maneuver, others a desperate attempt to shift the blame. But one thing was undeniable, Elon had made the first move in what promised to be a battle for the ages. Back in the courtroom, the air had thickened with the growing tension. The plaintiff's team was stunned, but not defeated. They scrambled to respond, and the atmosphere had shifted from calm to chaotic. Everyone knew this trial wasn't just a fight over money, it was about power, reputation, and survival. The kind of fight that could determine Musk's future, and the future of his companies, once and for all. Your Honor, the plaintiff's lawyer, Gregory Vance, stood up. His voice was cool, calm, almost too calm. The defense has chosen to engage in dramatic theatrics by presenting documents they claim are relevant. But we have yet to see any substantial evidence that will hold up in a court of law. What Mr. Musk is trying to do here is misdirect, to create a spectacle and distract from the real issue, his fraudulent actions. The words hung in the air. The room was still, every eye on Musk, who sat in his chair, expression unreadable. The truth was, the documents he had presented in his opening statement were just the beginning. They were his first salvo in a much larger strategy that had been brewing for weeks, months even. Elon's legal team, Sarah, his chief counsel, along with the top-tier attorneys from their firm, had been preparing for this moment for a long time. Sarah had always believed that the truth was the strongest weapon, but Musk wasn't interested in just presenting facts, he was interested in shaping the narrative, in taking control of the courtroom, and ensuring the world saw what he saw, that he wasn't the villain here. His ex-partner was. Musk leaned forward slightly, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the armrest of his chair. "I'm not trying to distract anyone," he said, his voice low but cutting through the room with ease. "I'm presenting the truth. The documents speak for themselves. If you're not willing to look at them, then we're wasting time." The tension between the two sides was palpable. Vance's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Musk saw a flicker of doubt pass across the other man's face. That was the first crack in the opposition's armor, and Elon knew it. The plaintiff's team had made one critical mistake. They underestimated Musk. He wasn't a man who would sit back and take the punches. He never had been. His track record of shaking up the status quo wasn't just limited to his companies, it extended to everything he did. And now, the courtroom was no different. "Mr. Musk, we can go on and on about these documents, but I think it's time we discuss something else," Vance said, shifting gears. "The issue at hand isn't your partner's wrongdoings, it's your actions, your influence over stock prices, and the undeniable manipulation of Tesla's valuation. These are the real charges." A hush fell over the courtroom. The moment had arrived. The accusation was as serious as it got. Stock manipulation. Fraud. If Elon had any hope of walking out of this trial with his reputation, and his wealth, intact, he had to prove that these charges were as absurd as they seemed. Musk's face remained expressionless. He had anticipated this. This was the real battle, the heart of the case. The accusation that he had deliberately manipulated Tesla's stock price was a direct assault on everything he had built. It was an attack not just on his business practices but on his very character. "We'll get to that," Musk said, his calm demeanor not betraying the storm of emotions inside him. "But first, I think it's important we talk about how your team has been withholding crucial information that would help clarify these charges. Documents that would prove I was acting in good faith." He paused, then added, "Or perhaps you prefer not to acknowledge those." The courtroom was buzzing now. The lawyers exchanged nervous glances, and Musk could see the shift happening in real time. They had not been expecting this level of confrontation. In the eyes of the jury, the moment could very well be the tipping point. Musk had done more than just defend himself, he had started to take control of the courtroom narrative. Sarah gave him a quick nod. The next phase of their plan was unfolding just as they had hoped. Musk's confidence grew as he noticed the shift in the opposition's demeanor. What had started as a calculated attack on his integrity was now slowly unraveling in front of their eyes. They were on the defensive, and he was pushing them into a corner. As the morning session drew to a close, the judge called for a break. Musk didn't move immediately. He sat still, his eyes locked on Vance, who had been visibly rattled by Musk's unyielding presence. "One move, one document at a time," Sarah said as she approached him. "This is working." Elon nodded, but he didn't feel the rush of triumph just yet. He knew the hardest part was still ahead. His strategy was simple but brutal: expose the flaws in his opponent's case, undermine their credibility, and force them to reveal their own weaknesses before it was too late. But each move, each piece of evidence, had to be timed perfectly. The stakes were too high for any misstep. Outside the courtroom, the world continued to watch. News outlets were already speculating about the direction the trial was headed. Was Musk truly innocent, as his documents suggested? Or was this another stunt from the unpredictable billionaire? The court of public opinion was swaying in real time, and Musk had only just begun to play his hand. Elon knew that it wasn't just about winning this case. It was about proving a point to everyone who doubted him, proving that no matter how hard the world pushed against him, he would always push back harder. As the trial resumed later that afternoon, the battle lines were drawn. The war had just begun. The courtroom had taken on an almost surreal atmosphere. Every word, every gesture, seemed magnified under the intense scrutiny of the media and the public eye. The legal battle between Elon Musk and the plaintiffs had reached a critical point, and now, it was time for the final moves. The tension in the air was thick, like the calm before a storm that no one could quite predict. Elon had spent the last several weeks preparing for this. While most of the world believed the outcome was uncertain, Musk had always been 2 steps ahead. This wasn't just about surviving the trial, it was about taking control of the narrative in ways no one expected. The previous days had been spent with both sides exchanging blows. The plaintiffs had presented their case against Musk with relentless intensity, but each time they tried to land a decisive blow, Musk's team countered with a calm but devastating response. The shocking documents, the pointed questions, and the relentless precision with which Musk approached the legal battle had turned the tide in his favor. But now, with the trial reaching its peak, Elon knew the real challenge lay in how he would finish this. There was no more room for error. The courtroom was waiting for his final move, and he had every intention of delivering it. It all began with a simple decision: Musk had to take the stand. His lawyers had been hesitant, concerned that his volatile personality and unpredictable nature might give the opposition more ammunition. But Musk was determined. He knew the only way to secure his victory was to speak for himself. To tell the world his side of the story, unfiltered. As he walked up to the witness stand, the room seemed to hold its breath. His normally confident demeanor was overshadowed by the weight of the moment. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control of the situation. But he would be. He had always been good at reading the room, and today was no different. The first few questions were expected. They centered around his role in Tesla's growth, his ownership, and his involvement in the alleged stock manipulation. Elon answered methodically, his voice clear but measured. He knew the questions would be intense, but he wasn't afraid. After all, the law had a long-standing history of protecting corporate executives who acted in good faith. And that was what Musk was. He was a visionary who believed wholeheartedly in the products he created. Then came the turning point. Gregory Vance, the plaintiff's lead attorney, leaned forward, a smug expression on his face. He had been waiting for this moment. He'd hoped that Elon would make a mistake, a slip of the tongue, anything that could unravel his case. This was the moment that could define the trial. "Mr. Musk," Vance began, "you've told us repeatedly that you did not manipulate Tesla's stock price. Yet, we have evidence that you made statements on Twitter that caused significant fluctuations in the stock. You tweeted that Tesla would be privatized at $420 a share. You don't see how that might be a problem, do you?" The courtroom went silent. The question was loaded. It was the tweet that had sparked the entire controversy in the first place, and it was the single most crucial piece of evidence the plaintiffs had. Elon didn't flinch. He leaned into the microphone, his hands steady, his mind focused. He had anticipated this. He'd already prepared his response. But more importantly, he knew this was the perfect opportunity to make a bold move that would shift the entire course of the trial. "That tweet was taken out of context," Musk said, his voice unwavering. "I made that statement because I was negotiating with investors who were interested in taking Tesla private. The $420 price was a number we agreed on, and I believed we had the financing secured. The tweet was meant to provide transparency and inform the public of the possibility. It wasn't intended to manipulate the stock." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Vance's expression darkened, but Musk wasn't finished. "Let me make this clear," Musk continued, his voice growing firmer. "I have always acted in the best interest of Tesla and its investors. My goal was never to inflate or deflate the stock price. My goal was to make Tesla the best company it could possibly be. That's the truth. The plaintiff's lawyer, clearly taken aback, tried to regain control. But your words. Let me finish, Musk interjected, his tone now commanding. You see, the thing most people don't understand is the pressure that comes with running a company like Tesla. The weight of trying to change the world, to make something that can actually shift the balance of power in the auto industry, it's immense. Yes, I tweeted. But I was transparent about my actions, and I believed in what I was doing. What I did was no different than any other CEO trying to secure the future of their company. There was a moment of silence as Musk's words hung in the air. It was the kind of moment that seemed to shift the direction of the entire trial. For the first time, the jury began to see Musk not as a reckless billionaire who didn't understand the consequences of his actions, but as a man who was deeply committed to his company, who was willing to risk it all for the greater good. The judge, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. Mr. Musk, you're claiming that you acted in good faith. But how do you respond to the allegations that your statements caused financial harm to investors, regardless of intent? Musk's response was immediate and direct. I believe that the actions I took were in line with the best interests of Tesla and its shareholders. I didn't cause harm, I was trying to create an opportunity for growth. Investors understood the risks, and they chose to invest in Tesla because they believed in its potential, just as I did. The room was electric. Musk had delivered his response with such conviction and confidence that it was impossible not to feel the shift in momentum. His approach wasn't just about defending himself, it was about re-establishing his credibility. He had taken control of the courtroom narrative, and the plaintiffs were left struggling to keep up. As the cross-examination continued, Musk's responses remained sharp and controlled. The plaintiff's team, desperate to break him, launched a flurry of attacks. But it was clear that they were no longer in control of the conversation. Musk had done what he always did best. He had turned the tide, shifting the focus onto his true intentions and the future of Tesla. And then, in a final act of boldness, Musk dropped the bombshell that would shake the entire case. I am not the villain you've made me out to be. I am a man who dreams big, and I take risks for a reason. I've always believed that we're on the verge of something extraordinary. And if that means breaking a few rules along the way, so be it. But I will not let this trial define who I am or what Tesla stands for. We are a company built on innovation, and no matter what happens here, that will never change. As Musk finished his statement, there was an eerie silence. The plaintiffs had no further questions. The jury was left to process what had just unfolded. Elon Musk had just redefined the narrative. The trial was far from over, but the tables had irrevocably turned. The journey that had seemed so uncertain just days before now had a very different feel. Musk had taken a huge risk by speaking out in such a way, but it was a risk he had to take. It was a move that could either make or break him. And with that, the courtroom stood still, waiting for the final act in this high-stakes drama. The days after Elon Musk's bold stand on the witness stand were a blur of media frenzy, intense legal strategy, and rising public interest. Musk had undeniably seized control of the narrative in the courtroom, but no one could predict what would come next. The plaintiffs, who had hoped to topple Musk with their accusations of stock manipulation, were now facing the very man they had sought to bring down. The courtroom drama had turned into something much more personal. It was in the final days of the trial when the emotional climax hit, when the truth behind Musk's actions, his motivations, and his vulnerabilities finally came to light in a way no one had expected. Elon had been prepared for the relentless cross-examination and the accusations hurled at him. He knew this trial wasn't just about stock prices, it was about his very identity, about everything he had built. But it was during one final round of questioning that the tension in the room reached its breaking point. The plaintiffs had saved their most damning piece of evidence for the final stages of the trial, a series of emails between Musk and his closest advisors. These weren't just corporate memos, they were raw, candid exchanges that revealed Musk's internal struggles, doubts, and fears. The emails depicted a side of Musk that no one had seen before, the side that wasn't the billionaire tech mogul, but a man who was constantly wrestling with the weight of his own ambition. Vance, the lead attorney for the plaintiffs, held up the first email, his voice dripping with confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what we have here are communications from Mr. Musk that show a clear and undeniable pattern. These emails suggest that Musk was not acting in good faith when he made his statements about privatizing Tesla. Instead, they show that he was fully aware of the risks to his company's stock, and yet he chose to proceed anyway, with little regard for the consequences." Musk's expression darkened, and for a brief moment, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The documents had been carefully selected. They were the kind of pieces of evidence that could break anyone, and they seemed to reveal a side of Musk that could be easily twisted into the narrative the plaintiffs had been pushing. The accusations were not just about business decisions, they were about Musk's integrity, his character. Vance continued, his tone sharp. "In one of these emails, you tell your advisors that, we can't let Tesla fail at all costs, and yet you were perfectly willing to take enormous risks with your public statements. How do you justify this reckless behavior to the people you claim to protect, your investors, your employees, and your customers?" The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. The jury looked back and forth between the screen displaying the email and Elon, who sat motionless in his chair, his eyes trained on the floor. Elon's legal team braced for impact. They had hoped this moment wouldn't come, but the emails were now front and center. The raw emotion that poured through those words, revealing Musk's sense of pressure and fear, was about to take center stage. They had been warned that this would happen, but nothing could truly prepare them for how devastating it felt to see Musk so vulnerable in front of an entire room. The emotional weight of the moment hit Musk hard. The man who had built SpaceX, Tesla, and so much more, the man who had faced down countless challenges and critics, suddenly felt exposed. It wasn't just the legal battle at stake now, it was his soul, his very identity. But then, something unexpected happened. Musk lifted his head, his eyes meeting Vance's. There was no hint of fear in his gaze, only resolve. The tension in his body shifted. He stood up slowly, silently, and walked toward the stand. It wasn't a move of defiance, it was the move of a man who had reached the emotional peak of his journey, who now understood what was truly at stake. "Mr. Musk, are you going to respond to the evidence presented?" Vance's voice was laced with triumph. Musk took a deep breath, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable emotion. "Yes, I'll respond. But I want to make one thing clear, I'm not perfect. I never claimed to be. I've taken risks, I've made mistakes, and I've hurt people along the way. But everything I've done with the belief that it was the right thing to do. I have always believed in Tesla, in SpaceX, in the vision I set out to accomplish. And I will never apologize for that." The room fell silent again. It was raw. It was honest. For the first time in the trial, Musk wasn't just defending his actions, he was revealing the humanity behind the empire. He wasn't just a billionaire businessman, he was a man, struggling with the weight of his decisions, battling his own inner demons. "I'm not asking for sympathy," he continued, his voice unwavering. "I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. I wasn't trying to manipulate anyone or play games with stock prices. I was trying to make something incredible happen. I've failed before. I'll fail again. But that's part of what it takes to build something that changes the world. I won't apologize for dreaming big. But I will apologize if anyone feels hurt by the way I did things." There was a long pause. Vance, clearly rattled, had no response. Musk's words had diffused the emotional tension in the courtroom in a way no one could have predicted. His vulnerability, his willingness to admit his flaws, didn't make him look weak, it made him appear more human, more relatable. And in that moment, the narrative shifted once again. The jury looked at Musk differently now. The carefully crafted image of the ruthless businessman was shattered, replaced with a man who had dedicated his life to pushing the limits of innovation. Yes, his decisions had been risky, and yes, they had consequences, but Musk's motives were not driven by greed or malice. They were driven by a desire to make the impossible happen. As the judge called for a short recess, the courtroom buzzed with a new energy. People who had once doubted Musk's sincerity began to reconsider. Was he truly guilty of the charges? Or had he been caught in a system that didn't fully understand his vision? The emotional climax had arrived, and with it, a new chapter in the trial had begun. The trial had reached its final days. The courtroom, once filled with the noise of cross-examinations and objections, now buzzed with a quiet anticipation. Everyone knew that this was the moment when everything would either collapse or be solidified. Elon Musk had turned the tides in ways no one expected, but there was still the matter of the final argument. The closing statements. And as his legal team prepared for the final push, the question on everyone's mind remained: would Musk's bold strategy be enough to win the case? Elon had spent sleepless nights over the past few days, contemplating every aspect of the case. In the midst of the whirlwind, he had remained remarkably calm. It was clear now, he wasn't just fighting for his reputation. This was a battle for the future of Tesla, SpaceX, and everything he had worked so hard to build. The stakes were high, but Musk had always been a master of high-stakes situations. This was no different. As the final day of the trial began, the tension in the courtroom was palpable. All eyes were on the attorneys as they prepared to make their closing arguments. The plaintiff's team, emboldened by the evidence they had presented, was ready to push for a decisive victory. But Musk's team had something up their sleeves, something that would take everyone by surprise. Elon's lead attorney, Jennifer Hall, had been with Musk from the start. She knew him better than anyone in the room, and she knew exactly how to play her final card. As she rose to deliver the closing statement, her voice was steady, calm, but with an unmistakable edge. She was prepared to turn everything Musk had said into a powerful argument for his innocence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jennifer began, addressing the court with unwavering authority. "What you have witnessed over the past few weeks is not just a trial about stock manipulation. It's a trial about vision. About a man who has spent his life pushing the boundaries of what's possible. About a man who has faced every obstacle, every challenge, and yet continues to fight, not just for himself, but for a future he believes in." The words hung in the air, and the jury, who had grown increasingly sympathetic to Musk's position over the course of the trial, listened intently. "You've heard the accusations. You've seen the emails. You've been shown the tweets. But what you haven't seen is the larger picture. You haven't seen the sleepless nights, the endless work, the sacrifices that come with trying to change the world. You haven't seen the weight on his shoulders every single day as he tries to keep his companies afloat while simultaneously creating revolutionary technologies. This trial isn't just about one tweet. It's about the very essence of what makes innovation possible." Jennifer's voice grew stronger, more impassioned. "Yes, Mr. Musk made mistakes. Yes, he took risks. But what you must understand is that those risks were never meant to deceive or manipulate. They were meant to propel his companies forward, to create something bigger than himself. He was transparent about his actions, and yes, he may have overestimated the timing or the certainty of some of his statements. But does that make him guilty of manipulation? Or does that make him a man who is willing to take bold steps, even when the world doesn't understand?" The courtroom was silent as Jennifer's words sank in. The jury, once so uncertain, now began to shift in their seats. The emotional weight of her argument was undeniable. Jennifer had framed Musk's actions in a way that wasn't about legal technicalities but about his fundamental nature as a visionary. "Mr. Musk," Jennifer continued, her voice now softer, more personal, "isn't a man who manipulates the system. He's a man who has redefined the system. He's the same man who founded PayPal, the same man who built Tesla from the ground up, the same man who defied the odds to create SpaceX and bring us closer to exploring Mars. His tweet may have been bold, but it was not malicious. It was born out of a desire to push the limits of possibility. And when you take that into account, you realize something crucial: Mr. Musk did not act with the intent to deceive. He acted with the intent to innovate. As Jennifer concluded her closing statement, there was a pause. The courtroom was charged with energy. The jury was no longer looking at Musk as a reckless billionaire but as a man who had risked it all for something bigger than himself. The plaintiff's attorney, Vance, delivered his closing argument with a tone that still held conviction, but it lacked the bite it once had. "We have shown you evidence of manipulation. We have proven that Mr. Musk's actions had consequences, and those consequences cost investors. His decisions were not mistakes, they were deliberate. And while he may speak of innovation, the truth is that he used his platform to drive up the stock price for personal gain." But the plaintiff's argument, once so forceful, now seemed like an echo. The courtroom had been changed by the emotional climax of Jennifer's statement. The truth had been revealed, not just in the legal sense, but in the human sense. The jury filed out, and the waiting began. For Elon, the waiting felt like an eternity. He had poured everything into this case, not just his defense, but his soul. He had shown the world the man behind the headlines, the visionary who had sacrificed everything to create a better future. He wasn't perfect, and he knew that. But he had always believed in the work he did. And now, the jury would decide if his belief was enough to clear him of the charges that had threatened to bring everything down. Minutes turned to hours. The media buzzed with speculation, but inside the courtroom, there was only silence. Finally, the doors opened. The jury had returned. The foreman stood, and the courtroom held its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of all charges." There it was. The verdict. The moment that would define Musk's legacy in the courtroom. The trial that had seemed so uncertain just days ago had come to an end, with Elon Musk emerging victorious. The tension that had held the courtroom in suspense for weeks dissipated in an instant. Musk stood up slowly, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over him. He had done it. He had won, not just the trial, but his freedom, his reputation, and his future. As Musk made his way out of the courtroom, the press surrounded him, firing questions in rapid succession. But there was only one thing on his mind: the future. The courtroom drama was over, but Elon Musk's journey was far from finished. The courtroom doors closed behind him, but the world outside felt as though it had been transformed. Elon Musk had won, an outcome that had seemed uncertain in the early days of the trial. But now, as he stepped out into the bright sunlight, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The trial, with all its drama and intensity, was over. Yet in many ways, it felt like the beginning of something new. The media frenzy was immediate. Cameras flashed as reporters rushed toward him, bombarding him with questions. Musk, his demeanor calm but undoubtedly tired, paused for a moment, taking it all in. Despite the chaos, there was a sense of clarity that had settled over him. The last few weeks had pushed him to his limits, emotionally, mentally, and physically. But now, he had a chance to reflect. Now, he could move forward. "Mr. Musk. What's next for you? Will this affect your plans for Tesla and SpaceX?" one reporter shouted. Elon's response was simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had been through. "The fight for innovation never stops. I've always believed that you have to be willing to fail in order to succeed. This is just another chapter in a long journey." It was the perfect answer, the kind of statement Musk was known for. But in the back of his mind, he knew that this trial, this victory, was not just about clearing his name. It had forced him to confront something much deeper, his own vulnerability. The trial had revealed the side of Elon Musk that few people saw. It had shown the world that, despite the image of invincibility he often projected, he was still a man capable of doubt, fear, and uncertainty. And while many had viewed that as a weakness, he had come to realize that it was part of what made him human. It was part of what allowed him to grow, to evolve, and to push the boundaries of what was possible. As he drove back to his office that afternoon, Musk's thoughts were scattered. There was so much to do, so many projects to oversee, and yet, there was also a growing sense of introspection. The trial had taken its toll, but it had also given him a renewed perspective. The constant battle between the demands of his companies and his personal life had always been difficult to navigate, but now, the stakes felt even higher. Elon hadn't just won the case in the courtroom, he had won in the court of public opinion. There were many who had doubted him, who had hoped for his downfall. But now, those same people were forced to reckon with the reality of his success. Musk wasn't just a billionaire. He was a symbol of perseverance, of the willingness to take risks when the odds were stacked against you. But what was next? The question weighed on him heavily. The trial had forced him to take stock of his legacy, both the good and the bad. Musk knew that the tech world, the business world, and even the media would be watching him more closely than ever before. He couldn't afford to let this victory go to his head. Instead, he had to use it as fuel to push even harder. And it wasn't just about Tesla or SpaceX anymore. Musk had long since set his sights on Mars, but now, his focus was on creating something even bigger, something that would change the very fabric of human existence. He had already begun to lay the groundwork for ambitious new projects, and the trial had only strengthened his resolve to make them a reality. As he walked into his office, Elon was met with the familiar faces of his team. His advisors, engineers, and key figures within Tesla and SpaceX were all present, awaiting his next move. The room was filled with an air of quiet expectation. "Elon, we've been following the trial closely," said one of his top engineers, Mark, with a grin. "Congrats on the win. I'm sure this is just another stepping stone for you." Musk smiled, his thoughts momentarily distracted. "Thanks, Mark. But this isn't just about winning a case. It's about showing everyone that we can keep pushing forward, no matter the obstacles." The conversation shifted to the future. Musk's team was eager to discuss new innovations in both Tesla's electric vehicles and SpaceX's upcoming missions to Mars. They talked about building the next generation of sustainable energy solutions, pushing the limits of space exploration, and designing vehicles that would revolutionize transportation as we knew it. But beneath the surface of those discussions, there was an unspoken understanding among the team. They had seen Musk at his most vulnerable, but they had also seen him rise to the occasion. They knew that this trial would only make him more driven, more focused on the long-term goals that seemed almost impossible to others. The following weeks were a whirlwind of press conferences, interviews, and internal strategy meetings. But despite the hectic pace, Elon found himself taking moments to reflect more than usual. He had always been someone who thrived on action, on moving from one project to the next. But now, after the trial, he felt as though he had to be more intentional about how he approached the future. In private, Elon began to open up to those closest to him about what the trial had meant. To his longtime friend and SpaceX colleague, Gwynne Shotwell, he admitted that the pressure had been overwhelming at times. "I've been through a lot of challenges," he said, "but this one really made me question my own approach. Not just in business, but in life." Gwynne listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "You've always been a risk-taker, Elon. But I think this trial showed people what you're really about. It's not about the money. It's about changing the world." Elon nodded, appreciating her words. "I hope people understand that now. It's not just about what I do, it's about the vision. The bigger picture. And I can't stop until we make that vision a reality." As the months passed, the storm of the trial began to fade into the background. But the impact of it lingered. Elon had won in court, but the true victory was the clarity it had brought to his life. The road ahead was still filled with challenges, both legal and personal, but for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk felt like he had the space to breathe. To think. And to plan for what came next. Elon Musk had never been one to rest on his laurels. Winning the trial was a victory, yes, but it was one he knew would only be fleeting if he didn't continue to push forward. For Musk, success had always been about momentum, about moving faster, reaching higher, and constantly evolving. With the weight of the trial behind him, he was now more focused than ever on the future. As the weeks following the trial passed, Musk threw himself back into his work with a fervor that was almost obsessive. Tesla's next big project, an electric vehicle designed to be affordable for the average consumer, was already in the early development stages. SpaceX, meanwhile, had a new mission in the works, a manned flight to Mars that could change the course of humanity forever. But Musk wasn't just focused on his companies. He had something bigger in mind. Elon took a deep breath. Delays were always a part of the process, but the stakes felt higher now. After the trial, he knew the world was watching his every move, waiting for him to slip up. The last thing he wanted was for SpaceX to lose momentum, especially on such an important mission. "All right," Musk said, his voice firm. "Let's get ahead of this. We'll invest in the technology. We'll move quickly. We'll do what we need to do to ensure this doesn't stop us." Gwynn nodded. "I'll have the team start working on it immediately." But as the meeting progressed, a new idea began to form in Elon's mind. SpaceX wasn't just dealing with regulatory issues. It was facing a challenge of perception. The public was growing skeptical about space exploration, about the cost, about the risks. And while Musk had always believed that the mission to Mars was worth the cost, he couldn't ignore the fact that the public's enthusiasm for space exploration was waning. This was his next challenge. He needed to get people excited again. He needed to make them believe in the dream of Mars. "What if we do something bold?" Musk asked, interrupting the discussion. "What if we make the mission to Mars something the world can't ignore? What if we take someone famous, and send them to Mars as the first civilian?" The room fell silent. Everyone looked at each other, unsure of what to make of this sudden suggestion. "You're talking about putting a celebrity on Mars?" Gwynn asked skeptically. Elon smiled, a glint of excitement in his eyes. "Yes. A civilian. But not just any civilian. Someone who has a massive following, someone whose journey will inspire the world. If we do this right, it could be the catalyst for the next phase of space exploration. It'll get people talking again. It'll reignite the dream." The idea was audacious, even by Musk's standards. But that was precisely what he needed, a way to capture the world's attention and give people something to believe in. He needed to make space exploration exciting, to bring back the magic of what it meant to go to the stars. After some discussion, Musk's team agreed to move forward with the plan. They began to brainstorm who the perfect candidate would be, a celebrity who was not only famous but also had the charisma and influence to inspire millions. Names like Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, and even some well-known actors were thrown into the mix. But Musk wasn't interested in a typical celebrity. He wanted someone who was going to change the narrative. A few weeks later, Elon had a conversation that would change everything. He called up a well-known tech entrepreneur and celebrity, someone who had already shown an interest in space travel. "I've got a proposition for you," Musk said. "What if I told you that you could be the first civilian to go to Mars?" The person on the other end of the line was intrigued. The idea seemed absurd, but it was also thrilling. The possibility of being part of history, of making a real difference in the future of humanity, was too good to pass up. "I'm in," the celebrity replied. "Let's make this happen." The announcement was made within weeks, sending shockwaves through the media. The world was captivated. Elon Musk had done it again. He had turned a potential setback into an opportunity to push the boundaries of what was possible. But as with every bold move Musk made, this one came with its own set of risks. Would the public embrace this new idea? Would it be seen as a publicity stunt, or would it truly inspire a new era of space exploration? Only time would tell. But for Elon Musk, there was no turning back. This was his next big risk. And as always, he was willing to take it. The announcement that a civilian, soon to be revealed as a high-profile celebrity, would be the first non-astronaut to venture to Mars created a media frenzy. It wasn't just another SpaceX mission, this was something unprecedented, something that promised to capture the world's imagination and bring space exploration into the mainstream in a way never seen before. Elon Musk had always believed that space exploration wasn't just about rockets and technology, it was about inspiring humanity. He wanted to ignite that spark of wonder in people, to remind them that the impossible could be achieved. And what better way to do that than to send a globally recognized figure into space? Someone who could not only represent the cutting edge of human achievement but also resonate deeply with the public. The media circus that followed the announcement was immediate. News outlets scrambled to report on the groundbreaking mission, speculating on who the celebrity might be. Public interest soared, and social media exploded with excitement and curiosity. Who would be chosen for this once-in-a-lifetime journey? Was it someone like Tom Hanks, who had played an astronaut in Apollo 13? Or perhaps a popular tech mogul like Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson? The possibilities were endless, and the guessing game only added to the intrigue. Behind the scenes, however, Elon Musk and his team at SpaceX were facing a mounting list of challenges. The mission was becoming larger than they had initially anticipated. The scrutiny was intense, with countless organizations, governmental bodies, and experts weighing in on the potential risks and ethical considerations of sending a civilian into space. Musk had always been a risk-taker, but this time, the stakes felt higher than ever. Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president and COO, was in constant contact with the legal team, the engineers, and the media relations department. As much as she admired Musk's vision, she couldn't ignore the enormity of the project they had embarked on. "Elon, we've been working on this mission for weeks now, and it's becoming clear that we're facing some serious logistical hurdles," Gwynne said, sitting across from Musk in his private office. "We're still trying to finalize the astronaut training for the celebrity. There are safety concerns we need to address. And on top of that, there's the question of public reception. This isn't just a rocket launch, it's a global spectacle." Musk leaned forward in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. His mind was racing. "I know, Gwynne. But we can't afford to let the fear of what could go wrong stop us from doing something great. This is what people want. We're not just sending someone to space. We're showing them that it's possible for anyone, to be part of the next chapter in humanity's story." "But the risks," Gwynne began, but Musk cut her off. "The risks are part of it," he said firmly. "If we let fear hold us back, we'll never get anywhere. We'll be stuck on Earth forever. This mission isn't just about the technology. It's about changing the way people think. The world needs to see that space is for everyone. That it's not just for the select few, the astronauts and billionaires, but for all of us." Gwynne hesitated, knowing that Musk's passion was unstoppable. "I understand. But we need to be prepared for everything, public backlash, technical failures, you name it. We can't afford to fail." Elon nodded, acknowledging her concerns. "We won't fail. This mission will succeed, and it will change everything." With that, the SpaceX team dove headfirst into the logistical nightmare of preparing for the mission. They needed to finalize the celebrity selection, ensure that every safety protocol was in place, and train the civilian astronaut to meet the rigorous demands of a journey to Mars. It was a monumental task, but Elon was determined. Meanwhile, the media speculation reached a fever pitch. Elon remained tight-lipped about the identity of the celebrity, refusing to confirm or deny any of the guesses that were circulating. This only fueled the public's curiosity. Online forums, television shows, and social media were filled with predictions and wild theories about who would be chosen. It was as though the entire world was waiting with bated breath for the big reveal. Finally, after months of speculation, Elon Musk revealed the identity of the celebrity who would be joining the Mars mission, none other than actress and activist, Shailene Woodley. Known for her roles in The Fault in Our Stars and Divergent, as well as her outspoken environmental activism, Woodley was an unexpected but perfect choice. Her public persona, down-to-earth, passionate, and committed to causes she believed in, made her the ideal representative of SpaceX's vision to democratize space exploration. The reaction was immediate and mixed. Fans of Woodley were thrilled by the news, praising her courage and commitment to something greater than herself. Others, however, questioned the legitimacy of the mission. Was this just a publicity stunt? Would a celebrity really be able to handle the intense physical and psychological demands of a mission to Mars? For Musk, however, the risks of this mission were part of the appeal. He wasn't just trying to change the way people viewed space. He was trying to push the boundaries of what was possible. And if sending a celebrity to Mars could ignite that spark of inspiration, then it was worth every challenge, every doubt, and every obstacle that stood in his way. As the months went by, SpaceX's engineers worked tirelessly to ensure the mission's success. They developed new life support systems, tested radiation shielding, and even ran simulated Mars missions to prepare the crew, Woodley included, for the journey ahead. Woodley's training was grueling, as she had to undergo the same physical preparation that any astronaut would. She learned how to survive in a pressurized suit, how to perform maintenance on the spacecraft, and how to handle the psychological pressures of being so far from home. But despite the challenges, Woodley remained determined. She was motivated not just by the opportunity to be part of history but also by her deep commitment to environmental causes. She saw the Mars mission as a way to demonstrate the importance of protecting the planet and ensuring humanity's future beyond Earth. The more she learned about space exploration, the more passionate she became about the mission's potential to inspire change. As the launch date approached, the world held its collective breath. The media was everywhere, broadcasting every detail of the preparations. The mission to Mars had become a global spectacle, and the anticipation reached a fever pitch. Elon Musk stood at the helm, watching as the spacecraft was prepared for launch. He knew that this was his chance to prove that space wasn't just for the elite, but for everyone. And as the final countdown began, he couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement. The world was watching, and this was his moment. It was a gamble, a huge, audacious gamble. But in Elon Musk's world, that was just another day at the office. The countdown to the Mars mission had begun, and the pressure was mounting. Elon Musk stood in front of a massive screen in SpaceX's control room, watching as engineers and scientists worked furiously around him. The date of the launch was fast approaching, and the stakes had never been higher. This mission was no longer just about technology or space exploration, it had become a global event, a symbol of human achievement, ambition, and the power of belief. The media frenzy surrounding the mission had reached a fever pitch. News outlets from around the world were camped outside SpaceX's headquarters, and social media platforms buzzed with speculation, excitement, and doubt. The eyes of the world were on Elon Musk, and there was no turning back. The countdown had begun, and there would be no second chances. Despite the public excitement, Elon could feel a weight pressing down on him. This was more than just another SpaceX mission. It was personal. He had always been driven by a deep desire to change the world, to push humanity to new heights. But as the launch date neared, he couldn't help but feel the magnitude of what he was about to do. Sending a civilian to Mars wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a leap into the unknown. A leap that, if successful, would redefine what was possible. Gwynne Shotwell walked into the control room, her face set with determination. She had been with Musk through thick and thin, through the highs of SpaceX's successes and the lows of its failures. But even she was feeling the pressure now. "Elon, we've got a problem," she said, her voice tense. He turned to her, brow furrowed. "What's going on?" "It's the launch vehicle. We've encountered an unexpected issue with the Falcon Heavy's fuel system. It's minor, but if we don't address it now, it could delay the launch. We can't afford that." Musk's heart skipped a beat. A delay. That was the last thing he wanted. Everything had been planned to the minute, and any delay would risk the integrity of the entire mission. But despite the pressure, he remained calm. "Fix it," he said simply. "Get the team on it. I don't care how long it takes. Make sure it's ready for launch." Gwyn nodded. "We're on it." As she left to gather the team, Elon turned his attention back to the screens, watching as engineers made adjustments, running diagnostics and tests to ensure everything was functioning perfectly. But even as the work continued, his mind wandered to the bigger picture, the responsibility that he had taken on. This mission wasn't just about sending a civilian to space, it was about showing the world that space exploration wasn't a distant dream. It was something that could be achieved now. The mission had been a gamble from the start. There were so many unknowns, so many risks. And yet, Musk had always believed that the risk was worth it. But now, with everything on the line, the weight of the decision was starting to feel heavier than ever before. Gwyn returned, looking more relieved but still focused. "The issue with the fuel system has been resolved. We're back on track. But Elon, there's something you need to hear." "What is it?" Musk asked, still staring at the screens. "Shailene Woodley, she's having second thoughts." Elon's gaze snapped to Gwyn. "What? Why?" "She's not sure she's ready for the mission. She's concerned about the risks, about what this means for her future. We've been getting a lot of pressure from her team, and she's worried about being the first civilian on Mars." Musk felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew that Woodley had been enthusiastic about the mission from the start. But this was the reality of space travel, the pressure, the unknowns. And now, the celebrity who had been handpicked to represent the future of space exploration was having doubts. "Let me talk to her," Musk said, his voice steady. "I'll handle it." Gwyn nodded. "I'll set it up." A few hours later, Elon was sitting in a private room with Shailene Woodley. The actress was pacing nervously, her hands wringing together in uncertainty. Her usual calm and confident demeanor was nowhere to be found. Instead, she seemed like a woman caught in the grip of doubt. "Elon, I don't know if I can do this," she said, her voice shaky. This is bigger than anything I've ever done before. I'm not an astronaut. I'm not prepared for something like this." Musk leaned back in his chair, considering her words carefully. He knew this was more than just a case of nerves, this was a moment of reckoning. Woodley was grappling with the reality of what she was about to do, what it meant for her life, her career, and the world. "I understand how you feel, Shailene," Musk said gently. "But that's exactly why you were chosen. This mission isn't just about being an astronaut. It's about showing the world that space is for everyone. You're not here because you're a professional astronaut. You're here because you believe in something bigger than yourself. You're here because you represent the future." Woodley stopped pacing and looked at Musk, her eyes filled with emotion. "But what if something goes wrong? What if I'm not strong enough? I've seen what's happened to astronauts. The risks are so high." Musk stood up and walked over to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Shailene, I'm not going to lie to you, this is risky. But we've prepared for this. The technology is in place. The mission is as safe as it can be. And if something does go wrong, it won't be because you weren't ready. It'll be because we, as humanity, took a step forward, regardless of the risks." Woodley swallowed hard, her breath shaky. "I'm scared." "And that's okay," Musk said, his voice soft but firm. "It's okay to be scared. But you have something most people don't. You have the courage to take that step, even when the world is watching. And that's what makes you a part of something truly historic." Woodley looked down, taking a moment to process his words. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. I'm in. Let's do this." Elon smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. "Thank you." We're going to change the world. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The final countdown to the Mars mission had begun. In just days, the Falcon Heavy would launch from Kennedy Space Center, carrying Shailene Woodley, the first civilian astronaut, into space. The tension in the air was palpable. The world was watching, and the pressure was mounting on Elon Musk and his team to deliver a flawless mission. Everything had to go according to plan. SpaceX's headquarters in Hawthorne, California, was buzzing with activity. Engineers were performing last-minute checks on the spacecraft, making adjustments, ensuring that every system was functioning perfectly. The media was everywhere, and Musk knew that one slip-up could turn the mission into a global fiasco. This was no longer just about technology, it was about the future of human space exploration. It was about proving that space could be accessed by more than just trained astronauts and billionaires. It was about showing the world that anyone, even a Hollywood actress, could be part of the next frontier. But as the mission date drew closer, Musk couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There were too many voices, too many external forces trying to intervene. He had always known that SpaceX wasn't just pushing boundaries in space technology, it was challenging the status quo of the space industry itself. And whenever you challenge the status quo, there are always those who push back. The first signs of trouble came when a group of influential politicians, lobbyists, and industry experts began raising concerns about the safety and ethics of sending a civilian to Mars. Their arguments were loud, persistent, and, in many cases, heavily publicized. Some questioned the wisdom of putting a celebrity on a mission to Mars, calling it nothing more than a publicity stunt. Others worried about the risks to human life, citing the dangers of deep space travel and the long-term effects of radiation exposure. The voices of doubt grew louder as the mission approached. Some critics even tried to rally public opinion against the mission, claiming that SpaceX was being reckless and putting profit over the safety of human lives. Elon's resolve was tested as he read through the headlines and listened to the constant barrage of criticism. It was one thing to face the risks of space exploration, but it was another to face a world that seemed determined to tear down everything he had worked for. But Elon Musk had always believed that the road to success was paved with adversity. He had faced skepticism and ridicule throughout his career, from his early days at PayPal to the challenges at Tesla and SpaceX. But every setback had made him stronger, more determined. And now, as the world watched, he had to stay focused, no matter how much the world doubted him. He sat alone in his office, reading through a report on the growing opposition to the Mars mission. He knew that he had to make a decision. He could either allow the noise and the pressure to derail everything he had worked for, or he could do what he had always done, push forward, no matter the cost. Just then, Gwynne Shotwell walked in, her face serious. "Elon, we need to talk." He looked up from the report, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" "We've got a problem," Gwynne said, sitting down across from him. "It's not just the external pressure. There are internal concerns as well. Some of the engineers are starting to question the safety of the mission. They're worried that we haven't accounted for every possible risk. They're asking for more testing, more preparation." Elon leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He had expected this. The closer they got to the mission, the more the risks seemed to grow. The weight of responsibility was heavy, and he knew that every decision he made now would have consequences. But he couldn't afford to let fear dictate the mission. "We've done everything we can to ensure the mission is safe," he said firmly. "The technology is sound. The team is prepared. We've trained for every possible scenario. There will always be risks, but that's what makes this mission historic. We can't let fear hold us back." "I understand," Gwynne said, her voice softening. "But you know how these things go. If something goes wrong..." "We'll deal with it," Elon interrupted. "We have to." Gwynne nodded but still looked uneasy. "All right. But we need to address the optics, Elon. The public perception is becoming a serious issue. We can't afford to have people questioning our motives. This mission has to be flawless. Elon stood up, walking over to the large window that overlooked the SpaceX campus. He could see the Falcon Heavy being prepped for launch, its massive frame towering over the hangar. The spacecraft was a symbol of everything SpaceX had worked for, a testament to the company's innovation, its drive to push humanity beyond Earth's boundaries. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "This is bigger than just a mission to Mars. It's about the future of humanity. About proving that we can push past the limits we've set for ourselves. And no matter what the critics say, no matter what obstacles we face, we're going to make it happen." The days leading up to the launch were a blur of activity. The final checks were completed, and the spacecraft was readied for its historic journey. Shailene Woodley underwent her last round of training, preparing herself mentally and physically for the unknown. She had faced doubts before, but now she was ready. Her commitment to the mission was unwavering. She understood the risks, but she also knew the importance of what they were about to do. As the launch date finally arrived, the tension in the control room was almost unbearable. Musk stood at the helm, surrounded by his team, watching as the final countdown began. The world was waiting. The mission was on the verge of becoming reality. The stakes had never been higher. The last-minute pressure from both internal and external forces had tested Musk's resolve. But now, with everything in place, he felt a calmness wash over him. He knew that this moment, this launch, was his chance to prove that the impossible was within reach. It was a gamble, yes, but it was a gamble that was about to change the world forever. The countdown reached its final seconds. The world held its breath. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The world held its breath as the final seconds of the countdown ticked away. For Elon Musk, every passing moment felt like an eternity. The immense pressure of ensuring the success of the Mars mission weighed heavily on him. This wasn't just a test of technology, it was a test of everything he had built, the dreams, the struggles, the failures, and the triumphs that had led to this moment. Every eye on Earth was watching, waiting to see if he could turn his vision into reality. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, the countdown reached 0, and the world erupted into applause and gasps as the Falcon Heavy roared to life, igniting the sky with a powerful burst of energy. The spacecraft, carrying Shailene Woodley and a team of SpaceX astronauts, slowly began its ascent into the heavens. For a few moments, everything felt surreal. The noise of the engines was deafening, but there was an eerie calm in the control room. The engineers and astronauts who had worked tirelessly for years to make this day happen stared in awe at the screen, knowing that history was being made right in front of them. But as the rocket climbed higher, Elon's calm was replaced with a sharp sense of focus. The unexpected was always lurking when it came to space exploration. The earlier challenges of internal pressure, external criticism, and last-minute technical adjustments had only fueled his determination. Musk knew that the real test wasn't just about getting the spacecraft off the ground, it was about what would happen in the hours and days ahead. As the Falcon Heavy ascended through the atmosphere, there was a brief moment when the engineers in the control room began to exchange worried glances. One of the telemetry signals began to falter. "Elon, we've got a minor issue with the power output of one of the boosters," said one of the engineers, his voice tight. "It's not critical yet, but we're losing efficiency. We need to make adjustments, or the mission could be compromised." Elon stood frozen, his eyes glued to the screen as he processed the information. The rocket was still in the early phase of ascent, but he knew that if they didn't act quickly, they might be faced with an even bigger problem. One that could jeopardize the entire mission. "Patch into the backup systems, and reroute the power flow," Musk said, his voice calm but commanding. "Don't let it get worse. We've prepared for this. Just stick to the protocol." The engineers scrambled to respond, furiously working to stabilize the rocket systems. Musk watched, his mind working quickly to anticipate every possible scenario. The Falcon Heavy's boosters were crucial for the mission to succeed, and if they didn't regain power, they would have to abort the launch. The pressure mounted. Shailene Woodley, sitting in the capsule with her fellow astronauts, could feel the strain of the ride as the rocket continued its upward journey. The vibrations shook the spacecraft, and she was aware of the tension in the air. This was no longer just about her dream, it was about humanity's dream. There was no turning back. "This is it," she said to herself quietly, gripping the straps of her seat. "This is what we've worked for." Despite her fears, Shailene had always believed in the mission. In her heart, she knew that the risks were part of the equation. Every step of the way, from the media pressure to her own doubts, she had been haunted by the magnitude of what they were doing. But as she looked out the window and saw the curvature of the Earth slowly disappearing behind them, she felt a sense of awe and peace that she had never known before. Back at SpaceX headquarters, the room was tense. The engineers and scientists continued to monitor the situation, their faces drawn with anxiety. As the minutes passed, it became clear that the power issues were being controlled. The backup systems were working, but it was a delicate balance. They weren't out of the woods yet. "Elon," Gwynne Shotwell's voice cut through the hum of the room, "we've got another issue. The communications system is starting to glitch. We might lose contact with the crew." Musk's eyes narrowed. Losing communication during a mission this critical could mean disaster. They couldn't afford a blackout at a time like this. "What's the root cause?" he asked, his voice steely. "We're still analyzing, but it looks like the solar array that powers the comms is misaligned," an engineer responded. "It's a minor error in alignment, but if it gets worse, we could lose the signal." Elon didn't hesitate. He had dealt with much worse, and he wasn't going to let a minor glitch stand in the way of success. "Initiate emergency reorientation of the array. Boost power to the backup systems and re-establish communication immediately." As the engineers scrambled to adjust the systems, Elon's mind raced. He had known that space exploration was full of unknowns, but today felt different. Every challenge that had arisen felt like it was testing him to his limits, pushing him to prove that not only could he build the future, but that he could handle whatever obstacles stood in his way. Time seemed to slow as the minutes passed. The tension in the room was palpable. Every second was a decision, every moment a risk. And then, as if on cue, the communications signal stabilized. Elon allowed himself a brief sigh of relief but didn't allow himself to relax fully. Not yet. The Falcon Heavy continued to push higher into the atmosphere, leaving Earth behind. The dark expanse of space began to take over the view, and the team at SpaceX watched as their ship approached orbit. They were almost there. The mission had survived its first critical phase. But Elon knew that this was just the beginning. The real challenges were yet to come. Mars was still a long way off, and the mission was far from guaranteed to succeed. Space exploration was full of unpredictability, and as the spacecraft continued its journey, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was still ahead. As he looked at the screens, he could see the faint outline of Shailene Woodley's face on the live feed. Despite the glitches and delays, she was still there. Her presence on that screen, her determination, reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. This was about more than just one mission. It was about setting the stage for the future. It was about proving that humanity could do the impossible if they just had the courage to try. And as long as the mission continued, Elon Musk would push forward, no matter what obstacles stood in his way. As the rocket soared higher into the black void of space, a sense of quiet triumph settled over Elon. The mission wasn't just about technology. It was about human resilience, about believing in the impossible, and about proving that humanity could reach for the stars. For now, the mission was on track. But the journey was far from over. As the Falcon Heavy sailed deeper into the black expanse of space, Elon Musk stood in the control room at SpaceX's headquarters, feeling both a sense of achievement and the looming weight of what lay ahead. The spacecraft had successfully reached orbit, but the path to Mars was far from certain. With each passing minute, the stakes grew higher. Space was unforgiving. Every small decision could make the difference between success and failure. Elon had come to understand this as a fact of life. Yet, there was something almost exhilarating about it. The unknowns, the challenges, they were what drove him forward. The crew aboard the spacecraft had settled into their routine. Shailene Woodley, the civilian astronaut, along with her fellow astronauts, had undergone years of intense training. But no one could truly prepare for the vastness of space. The isolation, the silence, the unrelenting pressure, they were all part of the experience. For Shailene, it was a dream come true, but that didn't mean the journey was easy. "We're all set to begin the long stretch toward Mars," a voice crackled in Elon's earpiece. It was Gwyn Shotwell. "We're tracking the spacecraft, but there's a problem. The booster's fuel cells are showing an anomaly. The power output's dropping faster than we anticipated." Elon's heart skipped a beat. He knew that the launch was just one battle, but keeping the spacecraft on course was a much bigger war. "Explain," he replied, his voice steady but tight with tension. "We're seeing a significant power drain from one of the booster stages. The onboard batteries are consuming more power than expected. If this continues, it could jeopardize the journey to Mars." Elon stood still, weighing his options. This wasn't just a minor glitch. Losing power meant losing control of the spacecraft's trajectory, and with a Mars-bound mission, that could mean disaster. He immediately started giving orders to initiate backup systems to reroute power and prevent a total loss. "We need to stabilize this now," Elon said, his voice cutting through the control room. "Don't wait. Just patch into the reserve systems and push the boosters to full throttle. We don't have much time." As the SpaceX engineers scrambled to adjust the power systems, Elon's mind raced. There were always risks when sending rockets into space, but this was something new. They were beyond Earth's orbit now, and the distance between them and the safety of the atmosphere was far too great to make a safe retreat. Hours passed. Musk remained at the helm, watching as the team worked tirelessly to stabilize the systems. He knew this was a critical moment. The world was watching, the pressure was building. If they failed now, it wouldn't just be SpaceX's reputation that was at stake, it would be the future of commercial space travel itself. In the spacecraft, the crew felt the pressure, too. The anomaly with the boosters had caused a ripple of anxiety among the astronauts. Shailene Woodley, though she had prepared herself for the unknowns of space travel, found herself questioning whether the team could make it. She had trained for years, but space, in its vastness and unpredictability, was not something anyone could entirely control. She glanced out the window, seeing nothing but the dark void of space, and a wave of doubt washed over her. "Hey, you okay?" one of her fellow astronauts, Captain Ryan Lawson, asked her. His voice was steady, but there was a flicker of concern in his eyes. Shailene took a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm good. It's a lot to process. You ever think we're pushing it too far?" Ryan gave a half-smile, his jaw tightening. "Every day. But that's what we signed up for. It's the unknowns that make this worth it. You don't get to be the first civilian on a Mars mission without taking some risks." But even Ryan, who had been to space before, couldn't hide the tension in his voice. They all knew what was at stake. Back on Earth, Elon's mind was still sharp despite the stress. He had fought so many battles in his life, against naysayers, against failures, and against technology that seemed determined to break down at every step. But this? This was different. The odds seemed to be stacking against them. Yet, Musk refused to let them give up. Space exploration wasn't supposed to be easy, but that was part of its allure. "Elon, we've got it," an engineer exclaimed, breaking the silence in the control room. We've stabilized the power output, and we've recalibrated the trajectory. It's going to take a few more hours, but the mission is back on track. The relief was almost palpable, but Elon knew better than to relax. This wasn't over yet. There were still too many things that could go wrong. They had managed to fix the problem with the boosters, but how long would it hold? What would happen if another system failed along the way? Gwyn shot him a look of silent understanding. She knew that while they had temporarily solved the problem, the real test was yet to come. Space was a merciless environment, and as they continued their journey deeper into the unknown, the challenges would only multiply. For now, though, the team was alive with a renewed sense of purpose. Shailene and the astronauts on board the spacecraft adjusted to the new reality. They had been brought back from the brink of disaster, and they knew that they couldn't afford to falter now. As the spacecraft continued its path toward Mars, Elon found himself standing at the window of the control room, staring out into the abyss of space. His reflection was a ghostly figure against the blackness. He thought about the journey so far, the doubts, the challenges, and the very real risks they had faced. But there was one thing he knew for sure: he was not going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The mission was still far from guaranteed. They had faced their first major hurdle, and there would be more ahead. But Elon Musk had never been the kind of person who let obstacles define him. For him, each challenge was just another step toward proving that the impossible could be achieved. As the days stretched ahead, he couldn't help but feel that this moment, this Mars mission, wasn't just about reaching another planet. It was about proving to the world that humanity could go farther than anyone ever imagined. And he would do whatever it took to make that dream a reality. The silence of space was deafening. The spacecraft had crossed into deeper parts of the universe, leaving Earth far behind, and yet, for all the marvels and mysteries around them, the crew aboard the Falcon Heavy couldn't shake the gnawing sense of unease. After the last glitch had been fixed, there had been hope that the worst was behind them. But hope, in space, was fleeting. On Earth, at SpaceX headquarters, Elon Musk sat in the control room, watching as the data streamed in from the mission's telemetry. Every reading was being analyzed, every number scrutinized. Even now, in the far reaches of space, the systems seemed fragile. Elon knew that this mission, this vision of humanity reaching Mars, could come to an abrupt halt with just one mistake. Elon, Gwyn Shotwell's voice interrupted his thoughts, and he turned to face her. Her face was grim, and her eyes bore the weight of something heavy. We've got a serious issue. The oxygen supply on the spacecraft is dangerously low. If the astronauts don't conserve it, they won't have enough to make it to Mars. Elon's heart dropped. Oxygen was crucial for the survival of the crew. It was the kind of problem that could spiral quickly out of control, especially in space, where every decision could have irreversible consequences. How low are we talking? Elon asked, his voice steady despite the rising panic in his chest. Less than 12 hours of usable oxygen. And that's if they conserve every breath, Gwyn explained, her tone taut with anxiety. If we don't find a solution in the next few hours, the mission will be in jeopardy. We may have to abort. Elon felt the familiar weight of the challenge press down on him. Space was no stranger to danger, but this was different. This wasn't just about getting the astronauts to Mars. It was about their survival. Every move from here on out could mean the difference between life and death. Inside the spacecraft, Shailene Woodley's face was pale, her lips pressed tight as she looked at the dwindling oxygen levels on her monitor. Her fellow astronauts, Ryan Lawson and Dr. Alice Munro, were equally tense. They had been trained for the worst-case scenarios, but even the best training couldn't prepare them for this kind of situation. How long do we have left? Shailene asked, her voice cracking with the strain of knowing the severity of the situation. Ryan looked at the numbers on his screen. We're not even sure. If we keep talking, moving, or using more power than we should, we might have only a few hours before the oxygen runs out. Shailene took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. It wasn't easy. There was no room for panic in this situation. The air was thin, and the isolation of space was pressing in on them from all sides. They were alone, billions of miles from Earth, and if they didn't solve this, they wouldn't survive. Back at SpaceX, Elon stood motionless, staring at the screens in front of him. His mind raced with possible solutions. He had always known that space was a harsh and unforgiving place, but this was a new level of desperation. There was no quick fix here, no simple answer. The technology they had built, the innovations they had dreamed up, seemed fragile against the unrelenting void of space. Elon, if we don't do something drastic, we'll lose them, Gwyn's voice came through again, shaking slightly. We need to act fast, or this mission is over. Elon nodded, his mind quickly shifting into action mode. He couldn't afford to lose another crew. Not after all they had been through. Not after everything they had risked. Okay, Elon said, his voice hard and clear. We're going to manually reroute the oxygen reserves from the backup systems. We'll have to adjust the fuel cells to compensate for the lost power, but we don't have a choice. Start working on it immediately. Rerouting oxygen will take time, one of the engineers warned. And there's a chance we might lose communication during the process. Elon didn't flinch. He understood the risks. Losing communication, especially at this stage, was a dangerous gamble. But it was a necessary one. We're doing it anyway, Musk replied firmly. And we'll fix the communication issues as soon as we can. The astronauts can't do this alone. Minutes felt like hours. Back on the spacecraft, the crew was struggling to keep calm as they faced the growing uncertainty. The tension was thick in the air. Shailene, ever the optimist, tried to hold her composure. We'll make it through this. We always do, she said, trying to convince herself as much as her fellow astronauts. Ryan gave her a tight smile but didn't answer. He was too focused on the oxygen levels, watching the countdown on his own screen. Dr. Monroe, who had been silent for most of the ordeal, suddenly spoke up. It's not just about conserving oxygen. It's about how we think. If we panic, we won't have enough clarity to solve the problem. We need to stay calm. The minutes stretched on as the team in SpaceX's headquarters worked at full speed. Engineers were pushing the limits of the backup systems, while Elon coordinated everything from the control room, giving orders with a precision that only came from years of experience. We're stabilizing the oxygen reserves, one of the engineers finally reported, relief evident in his voice. We should have enough for the crew to make it through the rest of the journey. Elon didn't allow himself to show any emotion. He knew they had won this battle, but there would be many more ahead. Continue monitoring the fuel cells. We're not out of the woods yet. On the spacecraft, Shailene could feel the tension begin to ease, the oxygen levels inching back toward safety. She took a deep breath, grateful for the reprieve. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself a small smile. They had survived. But even as the crew breathed easier, Elon knew this was only temporary. Space didn't forgive, and the worst was far from over. This mission had only just begun, and there would be more challenges ahead, ones that might require sacrifices, decisions no one should have to make. As the spacecraft continued its journey toward Mars, Elon Musk, standing in the control room, could only think of one thing: whatever came next, he would push forward. For the mission, for humanity, and for proving that nothing could stand in the way of progress. And in that moment, he realized that the real fight wasn't just against the unknowns of space, it was against every force in the world that wanted him to fail. This was his time to prove that no matter the odds, no matter the cost, he would do whatever it took to win. The cold, dark expanse of space surrounded them, suffocatingly still and silent. For Shailene Woodley and the rest of the crew aboard the Falcon Heavy, the mission had already surpassed all expectations of difficulty. The oxygen crisis had been narrowly avoided, but there was no respite in sight. The harsh reality of space travel was settling in, and it was clear now that survival itself would be a matter of grit, willpower, and ingenuity. On Earth, Elon Musk watched the team's progress unfold on his monitors. The data coming in showed no signs of letting up, the spacecraft was barely holding its course. The fuel reserves were dwindling, the trajectory unstable, and the margin of error was growing smaller with every passing second. Elon had spent years planning for this moment. Every contingency had been prepared for, every problem anticipated, but no one could have predicted the chaos space was throwing their way. "Gwyn," Elon said, his voice tight with urgency. "We've got less than 24 hours of fuel left. The spacecraft can't keep drifting at this pace. If we don't make an immediate correction, we're going to lose the entire mission." Gwyn Shotwell was at the command center, surrounded by her team. The room was alive with the hum of equipment, but the tension was palpable. She could see the worry in Elon's eyes, the concern that mirrored her own. "I'm aware, Elon. But we don't have a straightforward solution. The booster engines have already been pushed to their limits, and there's no guarantee the backup thrusters can make the necessary adjustments." Elon stood up from his seat, his mind racing. He couldn't afford to lose everything now. He had invested too much, not just financially but emotionally. This mission wasn't just about space exploration, it was about proving to the world that humanity had the courage to face the impossible. He clenched his fists, then released them. "Get me the engineers. I'm not accepting failure. We will find a way." Back in the spacecraft, the crew had been monitoring their fuel levels just as intently as the control room. Shailene stood at the window, staring out at the emptiness, her mind a whirl of thoughts. Space was beautiful, yes, but it was also crushingly indifferent. The farther they ventured, the more isolated they felt, not just from Earth, but from everything that made life meaningful. "How are we looking?" Ryan Lawson asked, his voice steady but carrying a note of concern. "Fuel's dropping faster than we expected," Dr. Monroe replied. "If we don't make a course correction soon, we'll miss our trajectory. We're too far to just turn back." "Not an option," Shailene muttered under her breath. "We can't give up now. We've come too far." But even as she said the words, the reality was hard to ignore. They were running out of time, and the clock was ticking down faster than any of them were ready for. On Earth, Elon and his team gathered around a table in the SpaceX command center. Engineers and scientists were looking over diagrams, cross-referencing data, and running simulations. The air was thick with the sound of rapid conversations and keyboard clicks, but no one was speaking with certainty. No one could guarantee the outcome. Elon sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the screen before him. The numbers weren't just numbers, they were the difference between life and death, success and failure. His mind was calculating at lightning speed, searching for the slimmest chance of survival. "Okay," Elon said, his voice calm but determined. "We're going to try using the solar panels to extend the fuel reserve. It's a long shot, but it might give us just enough time to correct our course." Gwyn raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we rely on solar power to maneuver the ship? That's never been done in deep space." "We don't have the luxury of waiting for a better plan," Elon shot back. "We either make this work, or we lose them." The room fell silent as the engineers and techs scrambled to figure out how they could modify the spacecraft's solar panels to feed extra energy into the thrusters. It wasn't a guaranteed solution, but it was the only one they had. "Start the modifications," Elon ordered. Back aboard the spacecraft, Shailene and her crew were anxiously awaiting word from the control room. The tension was unbearable. The oxygen was still holding steady, but the fuel, everything depended on the fuel. And they were running out. Shailene glanced around at her fellow astronauts. They had been through so much already, each challenge feeling like a new test of endurance. She thought about her family, about the people who had supported her dream to go to Mars. She thought about Earth, its blue skies, its greenery, the comforting noise of life bustling around her. "I won't let this mission fail," she whispered to herself. It wasn't just for her. It was for every person who had believed in her, for everyone who thought that space exploration could change the world. Just as her resolve hardened, a voice crackled over the communication system. It was Ryan. "Shailene, we've got confirmation from SpaceX, they're rerouting the solar power. It's a long shot, but we've got a few more hours to try to get this course corrected. We need to conserve everything we can." Shailene nodded, relieved but anxious. "Okay. We can do this." Minutes passed like hours. In the command center, engineers were making adjustments, trying to extract every ounce of power from the solar panels. On the spacecraft, the crew worked in unison, keeping the spacecraft as still as possible to reduce fuel consumption. It felt like a battle against time, a race with the universe itself. At last, the call came. The solar power reroute had worked. The spacecraft's trajectory was adjusted, and the fuel was now stable enough to reach Mars. The crisis had been averted. For now. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. But Shailene, ever the realist, knew better than to think they were out of danger. "Elon," Shailene said, her voice steady as she addressed the control room. "We're still heading to Mars, but we've got to be ready for anything. We don't know what's coming next." Elon's voice came through the comms, firm and resolute. "We'll always be ready. And no matter what happens, we're not stopping. This mission, this vision, will succeed." In the silence of space, as they continued their journey, one thing was certain: Elon Musk wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to redefine what humanity was capable of. And nothing, not even the vast, unforgiving cold of space, was going to stand in his way. Space, with its vast emptiness, had always been the greatest adversary to humanity's reach. But even in the quiet, silent void, there were threats unseen, lurking in the background, waiting to strike when least expected. Elon Musk knew this. He had been prepared for many challenges on the path to Mars, but nothing could have fully prepared him for what was about to unfold. It had started with a strange fluctuation in the spacecraft's life support systems. It was subtle at first, just a slight anomaly in the atmospheric pressure. Nothing too alarming, but enough to raise suspicion. The crew had experienced these small, inexplicable issues before, common quirks in space travel, easily corrected with a quick patch. But this time, the problem was different. Inside the spacecraft, Shailene Woodley was sitting at her station, reviewing the latest diagnostics, when she felt a strange coldness seep into the air. It wasn't just the chill of space, it felt unnatural. Her fingers froze on the controls as she glanced at the pressure gauges. They were reading normal, everything was supposed to be fine, but the air was growing colder by the second. "Ryan," Shailene called out, her voice tight with concern. "Do you feel that?" Ryan Lawson, who was standing at the observation window, turned, his face pale. "I thought it was just me. But yeah, it's getting colder in here." Shailene tried to calm herself. She knew panic would only make things worse. She reached for the intercom, but before she could make the call to the control room, the temperature dropped further. The cabin lights flickered, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. "Everyone, stay calm," Shailene said, taking a deep breath. "This could be another glitch. Let's just run a full systems check." Dr. Alice Monroe stepped forward, her eyes wide. "No. This isn't normal. The readings are fine, but something's off. We should be warmer in here. I think we have a bigger problem." A sudden alarm blared across the ship's control panel, followed by a loud hiss as the life support system flickered out for a moment. The crew froze, their worst fears beginning to materialize. If the life support system failed completely, they were looking at an immediate loss of breathable air. They couldn't survive in the vacuum of space without it. "Shailene, Ryan, check the atmospheric control valves," Dr. Monroe ordered. I'm going to look at the backup oxygen tanks. Shailene's heart raced as she scrambled to the valves. Her hands shook as she twisted the control, trying to recalibrate the system, but nothing worked. The temperature continued to plummet, and she could see the frost beginning to form on the windows. It was like the very air around them was rejecting them. Ryan joined her at the valves, both of them desperately turning knobs and pushing buttons. But every effort was in vain. The temperature was still dropping, the air still thick with uncertainty. "This can't be happening," Shailene muttered, her voice cracking. "We've made it this far. We're so close." Back at SpaceX headquarters, Elon Musk sat in the control room, staring at the same data that was flashing across the crew's monitors. His stomach sank as he saw the sudden drop in temperature. This wasn't just a system malfunction, it was something else. Something he couldn't predict. "Gwyn," Elon's voice was sharp, urgency in every word. "Something's wrong with the life support systems. The temperature is dropping, and I can't figure out why. It's like the air itself is becoming hostile." "I see it, Elon," Gwyn responded quickly. "We're running diagnostics on all systems right now. It's possible there's a failure in the spacecraft's thermal regulation. I'll get the engineers working on it, but the temperature is dangerously low. If this doesn't get fixed soon, they'll freeze." Elon's eyes narrowed, his mind working in overdrive. A cold chill swept over him, as if the universe itself was testing him. He had faced challenges before, every obstacle seemed more insurmountable than the last, but this was different. This wasn't just about getting to Mars anymore. This was about survival. "Do whatever it takes to fix this, Gwyn. I don't care what it costs. Just save them." As the engineers at SpaceX scrambled to trace the problem, Elon was left to consider their next steps. If the spacecraft's temperature continued to drop, they wouldn't have the time to send a rescue mission. They would lose everything. The whole mission, everything he had built, could end in failure. And this time, there would be no quick solution. Space didn't work that way. Back aboard the Falcon Heavy, the crew's situation was growing dire. Shailene's fingers were numb as she desperately worked on the controls, trying to bring the temperature back to a safe level. The frost on the windows had spread, and the air felt as though it had turned to ice. Ryan was pacing, doing everything he could to keep the crew from panicking, but even he couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread in the pit of his stomach. "We're running out of time," Dr. Monroe said, her voice low but urgent. "The oxygen supply is being compromised by the cold. If the temperature doesn't stabilize soon, the entire system could freeze. We need to figure out what's causing this. We need help." Shailene clenched her jaw, willing herself not to succumb to the panic clawing at the edges of her mind. She had come too far. The mission had come too far. "We're not giving up," she said firmly. "I don't care how impossible it seems. We're not going to let this end now." At that moment, a voice crackled over the comm system, and it was Elon Musk. His words, though calm, carried the weight of his unshakable determination. "Shailene, listen to me," Elon said, his voice cutting through the cold silence. "We've traced the issue. It's not a malfunction. Something is interfering with the spacecraft's environmental controls, a cosmic anomaly, we think. We're working on rerouting power to the backup systems, but you need to act fast. The temperature will continue to drop. If you can access the secondary heating systems manually, you may be able to override the problem until we can fix it permanently." Shailene's eyes widened. A cosmic anomaly? She had heard rumors of unexplained phenomena in space, but nothing had prepared her for something this bizarre. "Okay, we'll try. But I need you to keep us updated." "We need to fix this now," Shailene replied, the weight of Elon's words sinking in. She turned to Ryan and Dr. Monroe. "We need to access the secondary heating systems. Let's move." As they worked together, every second felt like an eternity. There was no room for error. Space had a way of amplifying every mistake, every lapse in judgment. And in the cold, unforgiving expanse of the cosmos, there would be no second chances. After what felt like hours, Shailene's fingers finally hit the right switches. The secondary heating system kicked in, and the temperature began to rise, slowly at first, then more rapidly as the system warmed the cabin. The frost on the windows started to melt away. "We've got it," Shailene said, her voice filled with relief. But the battle was far from over. Elon's voice crackled through once more. "This isn't over," he said. "We've got a lot more to contend with. Stay alert." As the temperature stabilized and the crew caught their breath, they all understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. The invisible enemy in the form of a cosmic anomaly had nearly taken everything from them, but they had survived, just barely. Now, more than ever, they knew that the greatest enemy wasn't just the unknowns of space, it was the relentless will to survive, to push forward no matter the odds. And Elon Musk's vision? It would not be deterred. The cold was no longer the crew's biggest concern. The temperature had stabilized, the oxygen was flowing, and the immediate threat had passed. For now. But deep down, Shailene Woodley and the rest of the crew knew that space was always lurking, waiting for its next opportunity to test them. In the control room at SpaceX headquarters, Elon Musk sat, silent but fully alert, watching the telemetry data as it flashed across his screens. The last several hours had been tense, but now there was a moment of calm. It was a moment he'd learned to cherish, but he knew it wouldn't last. In space, there was always something just waiting to go wrong. "Gwyn, run another systems check. We need to be sure everything is holding up," Elon ordered, his voice low but urgent. Gwyn Shotwell was standing near the large console, monitoring the spacecraft's vital systems. Despite her outward composure, her mind was running at full speed. This mission was bigger than any one person or company. It was about humanity's future, about proving that they could go beyond the bounds of Earth and colonize another world. She nodded to the engineers. "We're on it. Checking every system now." But as they ran their diagnostics, the next crisis emerged. It was an anomaly, a sudden and unexplainable power surge that jolted through the spacecraft's systems. The lights flickered, then dimmed. The hum of the machinery faltered, and for a moment, everything went still. "Shailene, can you hear me?" Elon's voice came through the comm system, calm but urgent. "We hear you, Elon. What's happening?" Shailene asked, her voice betraying a hint of concern. "We just detected a massive power surge coming from the main engine thrusters," Elon replied. "It's affecting the stability of the spacecraft. We need to correct it immediately, or we'll lose control." "Understood," Shailene said quickly. "We're on it." She turned to Ryan and Dr. Monroe, who were still in the command center of the spacecraft. There was no time to waste. They had to act now, or they would be lost to the vast nothingness of space. "Ryan, check the thrusters. See if we can identify what caused this surge. Monroe, start rerouting the power to the secondary systems, just in case we need to cut the main engine." Ryan Lawson was already at the control panel, his fingers flying over the touchscreens as he accessed the thruster data. "This doesn't make any sense. The surge is coming from the propulsion system itself. It's almost as if the engine's been compromised. If we can't isolate the problem, we're looking at a full system failure." Monroe worked alongside him, quickly accessing backup systems and rerouting the spacecraft's power to ensure there was still some stability. "We have to be ready for a full shutdown. If the thruster fails, we'll need every backup available to survive." Shailene stood still, watching them work. The weight of responsibility was unbearable. If something went wrong here, if they couldn't fix this in time, the mission would be over. She couldn't let that happen. "Gwyn," Shailene said over the comms, "we need instructions. This is bigger than just a malfunction. We think the propulsion system has been damaged. Do not shut down the engines unless it's absolutely necessary, Gwyn responded sharply. There's still a chance the surge can be contained, but we need to act fast. We've located the source of the issue, it's the main power converter. If it blows, you're going to lose all thrust, and the spacecraft will be adrift. Shailene's stomach churned. Adrift. It was the one thing they couldn't afford. Understood, she replied. Ryan, get to that power converter. Monroe, make sure all other systems are ready to compensate if we lose the thrusters. On it, Ryan said as he darted towards the equipment locker. The tension in the air was suffocating. The spacecraft was an incredible piece of technology, Elon Musk's legacy, but in this moment, it felt like it was hanging by a thread. The kind of thread that could snap at any moment, leaving them stranded in the dark void of space. As Ryan made his way to the power converter, a wave of uncertainty hit him. He knew the stakes. One wrong move, and everything would be over. There would be no one to help them. Space wasn't kind. It didn't wait for mistakes to be fixed, it just took, without warning. Ryan knelt beside the power converter, carefully removing the outer casing. The inner components were sizzling with electrical energy, sparking in places. It was a mess. A dangerous mess. Shailene, I don't know how much time we have, Ryan said, his voice strained. This thing is about to overload. If I don't disengage the faulty part now, we're going to lose everything. Do it, Shailene ordered, her voice resolute. We'll hold on as long as we can. Monroe was at her side, inputting new commands into the secondary power grid to take over the load. I'm switching over to backup. We have a few minutes, maybe less, to stabilize the ship. It's now or never. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. The spacecraft was teetering on the edge, its systems failing one after another, and all they had was each other and their training. The crew had to make it work. Got it. Ryan shouted. The faulty converter is disengaged. We've got the backup online. The power surged back to life, the thrusters roaring to life once more. The spacecraft stabilized, and the deadly descent into chaos had been avoided, for now. Shailene released the breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Good job, Ryan. Everyone stay alert. We're not out of the woods yet. In the control room, Elon allowed himself a brief moment of relief before the next wave of challenges arrived. He knew that this was just one small victory in an ongoing war against the impossible. There would be more problems, more dangers, and more tests of their resolve. But if they could face each one head-on, they would eventually make it to Mars. Keep it together, everyone, Elon's voice came over the comms. We've got a long way to go, and we're not stopping now. Let's make history. Shailene looked around at her crew. They were all exhausted, drained, and pushed to their limits. But in their eyes, she saw something unshakable, a fierce, unyielding determination to finish what they had started. Onward to Mars, Shailene said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. The journey was far from over, but the crew had proven one crucial thing: they would not break. No matter how many limits were pushed, no matter how many obstacles were thrown their way, they would face them. Together. And Elon Musk? He would do whatever it took to get them there. His vision for humanity's future wasn't a dream, it was a promise. And he would make sure it was fulfilled. It was hard to tell where the pressure came from more intensely, the unforgiving vacuum of space or the relentless pressure of the court case back on Earth. Elon Musk was starting to feel the weight of both worlds bearing down on him. With every passing hour, the crew of the Falcon Heavy found themselves edging closer to their goal, but it was becoming increasingly clear that the road to Mars wasn't just about surviving space, it was about surviving on Earth too. The legal battles had escalated. A smear campaign was gaining traction in the media, with Musk's competitors and critics twisting his every move. The trial had taken an unexpected turn as the courtroom drama began to leak out, and every decision Musk made, whether on Earth or in space, seemed to be scrutinized. At SpaceX headquarters, Elon paced, his mind far from the engineering breakthroughs he was known for. The trial loomed over him. He had to fight for the future of his companies, his vision, and his crew, everyone involved in the mission. He hadn't been able to get in contact with his legal team for hours. They were working overtime, battling in court to ensure that the truth about SpaceX and the Mars mission would prevail. But Elon had no choice but to stay focused on the mission at hand. The Falcon Heavy and its crew were far from Earth, and the situation up there had taken another troubling turn. Back aboard the spacecraft, Shailene Woodley and the rest of the crew had just finished conducting another check on their systems. The power systems were stable for now, but the psychological toll was starting to show. The endless isolation of space, the pressure of being so far from home, it was beginning to wear on them. Shailene knew that the team needed to talk, to connect. Without that bond, their mission could unravel just as easily as their spacecraft's thrusters had a few days ago. Space had a way of making you feel insignificant, a small speck in a vast, indifferent universe. But it also gave you the space to think, to reflect. The crew had to remember why they were here. Why they had volunteered for this journey. Why they had chosen to be a part of this grand experiment to push humanity beyond Earth. "Hey, everyone, can we gather in the common area for a minute?" Shailene asked over the intercom. "We need to talk." The team gathered in the small, circular room, a break from the cockpit's cold metal walls and flashing screens. It was the one place where they could sit, look each other in the eye, and not have to worry about engineering systems or life support. Here, it was just them. Ryan sat first, taking a seat across from Shailene. Dr. Monroe followed, as did the rest of the crew. The quiet hum of the spacecraft in the background created a sense of eerie calm as the team settled in. Shailene took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I know things have been tough," she began. "The pressure, the long days, the unknowns. But we're closer to Mars than anyone in history has ever been. We've made it this far, and we're going to keep going." Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of the realization that this mission wasn't just a technical feat, it was a test of the human spirit. Ryan spoke up, his voice hoarse. "It's just hard to keep going when everything feels so uncertain. We're out here, and there's no turning back. If something happens, if we mess up, there's no one to help us." Dr. Monroe nodded in agreement. "The isolation is unlike anything I've ever experienced. There's a weight to it, like a constant pressure in your chest. And the court case, it doesn't help. All this tension, all these eyes watching, it's affecting the way I think." Shailene smiled softly, her eyes full of empathy. "I get it. But that's exactly why we need to talk about it. We're all feeling the pressure, but we can't let it consume us. We've made it this far because we're resilient. All of us. And we can't forget that. It's not just about surviving the mission, it's about surviving this, together." As the crew sat in silence, each of them processing their own thoughts, Elon's words back at SpaceX echoed in Shailene's mind. It's not just about surviving space. It's about surviving Earth too. Elon had always been able to compartmentalize, his ability to focus on the mission despite external pressure was legendary. But even he was beginning to feel the effects of juggling two worlds. On the one hand, the Mars mission was his dream, his vision. On the other, his companies were being threatened by legal challenges and public scrutiny. Back in the courtroom, the pressure was mounting. Elon had his legal team fighting tooth and nail, but the opposition was relentless. The case had taken on a new level of personal intensity. The prosecution was accusing Musk of negligence, of putting profits ahead of safety. They were twisting the facts, distorting the truth, and painting Musk as a reckless billionaire who cared more about his vision than the lives of his crew. It wasn't just about business anymore, it was about the future of human exploration, and whether Musk would be allowed to continue his mission to Mars. At that moment, the pressure on both fronts, space and the courtroom, felt unbearable. Elon was exhausted, his mind flickering between legal arguments and calculations for the next phase of the journey. The courtroom was where his future would be decided, but the mission was happening right now, 250 miles above Earth. The crew on the spacecraft, despite their doubts, found strength in each other's presence. They knew they could trust their training, their skills, and each other. But they also knew the weight of their mission. This wasn't just about exploring space, it was about securing humanity's future. And if they failed, it would be a failure of a generation. Back on Earth, Elon's legal team was working overtime to fight the accusations. Every hour mattered. If the court ruled against him, everything he had built, the vision for Mars, the future of SpaceX, would be at risk. As the day wore on, both Elon and his team knew they had one choice: to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. On Earth or in space, the mission couldn't stop. There was too much at stake. In the quiet of space, Shailene looked around at her crew. The stars outside were distant, cold, and beautiful. But she knew that the real beauty was in what they were doing right now. They were part of history. And Elon Musk? He was out there, somewhere, in the fight of his life, doing what he did best, leading, innovating, and refusing to back down. The silence of space had never felt so oppressive. The once beautiful view of Earth from the Falcon Heavy's cockpit now seemed like a distant memory, as if the planet below had become a fading, unreachable dream. The crew was beyond the halfway point of their journey to Mars, but each moment felt like they were inching closer to an abyss. Shailene Woodley stared out into the void, her mind racing. She'd been keeping busy, focusing on every task, every system check. Anything to keep from dwelling on the enormity of what they were doing. But it was hard not to think about what they were risking. Each problem they solved only revealed more challenges ahead. Every new calculation was a reminder that, despite all their hard work, there was no guarantee they would succeed. The crew had pulled together during the previous crises, and now they had no choice but to keep pushing forward. Mars was still out there, waiting for them. They had to make it there, no matter the cost. Inside the control room back on Earth, Elon Musk wasn't faring any better. The legal battle had taken yet another unexpected turn. His team had uncovered a new strategy, a bold move that could change the entire course of the trial. But to make it work, Elon would have to do something he had never done before. He would have to gamble everything on a single, audacious maneuver. Elon sat at his desk, surrounded by a team of lawyers and advisors who were busy analyzing every possible outcome. The courtroom was less than a day away from another key hearing, and Musk knew that if he didn't act fast, the consequences could be devastating. "We've found something," Gwynne Shotwell's voice came through the comm system, cutting through Elon's thoughts. "The prosecution is relying heavily on public opinion, and that's playing in their favor. They've built a narrative that you're reckless, that you don't care about your crew, or the people you work with." Elon leaned forward in his chair. "I know that narrative. But I'm not going to let them win." "What's the plan?" "We have a counter-narrative," Gwynne said, her voice resolute. "You've been accused of making dangerous decisions for profit. But we have the evidence that shows the safety measures taken for this mission are unprecedented. If we present the full extent of what SpaceX has done to ensure crew safety, it'll undermine everything the prosecution is claiming." Elon's eyes narrowed. "But how do we present that without looking like we're backpedaling?" "That's the gamble," Gwynne replied. "We need to turn the focus back onto the mission. We present the human cost of space exploration, the risks we're taking as a species. The world needs to understand that you're not just making a business decision here, you're making a sacrifice for the future of humanity." Elon was silent for a moment, his mind turning over the implications of this strategy. He had always prided himself on thinking outside the box, but this was something different. This wasn't just about innovation or engineering. This was about changing the narrative of his entire career. "This could work," Elon said finally, his voice tinged with both determination and uncertainty. But it could also backfire. If the jury sees it as a publicity stunt, we're done. We need to make it personal. We need to show them what's at stake. Gwyn gave a small, knowing nod. Exactly. You've always said that you're willing to risk everything for the future. It's time to prove it. With a deep breath, Elon looked out the window of his office, staring into the vastness of space. The crew aboard the Falcon Heavy was fighting their own battle. They were far beyond Earth's reach, where failure could mean death. And yet, the mission had to go on. This wasn't just about Mars. It was about everything they were building: SpaceX, Tesla, the future of humanity. And Elon would do whatever it took to make sure they all succeeded. Back in space, Shailene was feeling the weight of that same pressure. The crew had just completed another critical systems check, and this time, everything seemed stable. For the moment. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't last. Space was full of surprises, and none of them were good. Ryan Lawson had been quiet for most of the day, his mind clearly occupied with the mission. He had been working alongside Dr. Monroe to monitor life support and propulsion systems, but there was an unease in his eyes that Shailene couldn't ignore. "What's on your mind?" she asked as she approached him. Ryan glanced up, startled for a moment, then gave her a wry smile. "Just thinking about what's next. You know, after all this time, you start to wonder, what if we never make it? What if something happens out here?" Shailene paused, then sat down beside him. She could feel the weight of his words in the quiet of the spacecraft. "That's why we're doing this. We're taking the risks, so others won't have to. Mars isn't just a dream. It's our future." Ryan nodded slowly, the uncertainty in his eyes slowly replaced with resolve. "I know. I just wish we could do more to show people that it's worth it." Shailene glanced at the control panel, her thoughts drifting to the legal battle back on Earth. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. The world was watching, waiting to see if they would succeed or fail. The stakes had never been higher. Elon Musk had always been known for his boldness. Now, it seemed, he was about to take the biggest gamble of his life, not just for SpaceX, but for the entire future of human exploration. Back on Earth, the day of the hearing was fast approaching. Elon Musk had a plan, and this time, it was a personal one. His legal team was preparing to launch their new strategy in the courtroom. If it worked, it could change everything. If it didn't, the consequences would be dire. On the Falcon Heavy, Shailene and the crew were preparing for another long stretch of solitude as they continued their journey to Mars. The systems were stable, but there was no escaping the underlying tension. They were all in this together, facing the unknown. And in the courtroom, Elon Musk was ready to do whatever it took to win, not just for himself, but for the future of humanity. The courtroom was packed. Every eye was on Elon Musk, who stood at the center of the storm, ready to face the culmination of months of legal battles. His legal team had spent every waking moment strategizing, anticipating every argument, and crafting a defense that would not only clear his name but ensure the survival of SpaceX, Tesla, and his vision for the future of humanity. It was do-or-die time. Musk's decision to introduce a bold, personal defense strategy was nothing short of a gamble. If it succeeded, it could rewrite his legacy as a visionary leader. If it failed, it would spell disaster for everything he had worked for. But Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from risk, and today would be no different. In the sleek, high-tech courtroom, the opposing counsel stood ready, their faces set in stern opposition. They were prepared to tear apart Musk's defense, to prove their case that his decisions had been reckless and had endangered lives for the sake of profit. Elon's heart raced, but outwardly, he was the epitome of calm. He had always operated in high-pressure environments, whether it was launching rockets into space or taking on entire industries. This courtroom was no different from the countless boardrooms he had faced. His mind was sharp. His plan was in motion. "We rest our case," the prosecution said, sitting down with a look of quiet confidence. The judge nodded, acknowledging the opposing side's presentation. Then, all eyes turned toward Elon Musk and his team. Elon rose from his chair, adjusting his jacket as he moved toward the front of the room. His legal team had prepped him well. He had rehearsed his statements for hours, refining his words so that each one hit with impact. He knew this wasn't just about winning the case, it was about telling the world why this mission mattered. It was about painting a picture of a future beyond Earth, one where humanity would no longer be confined to a single planet. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of SpaceX, but as a man with a vision. A vision for the future of humanity, Elon began, his voice calm, yet full of conviction. A vision that extends beyond the confines of Earth, that pushes us to reach new heights and explore new worlds. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the courtroom. Every person there knew the stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't just about a company. It was about the survival of a dream. I understand the accusations against me. I understand the doubts and the concerns, Elon continued, his voice unwavering. But let me make this clear. The decisions I made were not easy, nor were they made out of greed or recklessness. They were made because I believe, with every ounce of my being, that humanity's future lies beyond Earth. That is why we are here, fighting for the future of space exploration. The courtroom was silent as Elon's words echoed in the room. For the first time in the trial, the room seemed to shift. The prosecutor's face was unreadable, but the jury appeared to be listening intently. Elon's legal team stood by him, their eyes focused on the proceedings. This wasn't just a case about negligence or profit margins, it was about legacy. And it was about proving that SpaceX wasn't just a business venture, it was a catalyst for human advancement. The prosecution had tried to paint him as a reckless billionaire willing to sacrifice anything to make his vision a reality. But Elon was now doing something unexpected. He wasn't hiding behind corporate jargon or technicalities. He was being raw, honest, and human. In space, Elon said, there is no room for failure. There are no second chances. Every decision we make, every step we take, is calculated with the understanding that lives are at risk. The mission we are on, the journey to Mars, is not just about SpaceX. It is about all of us. It is about humanity's survival. The room grew heavy with the weight of his words. For a moment, it seemed like time had slowed. Musk's defense wasn't about denying the risks or mistakes. It was about showing the larger picture, the one that transcended the trial, the corporate politics, and the courtroom drama. We're not just building rockets. We're building a future. A future where our children will live on other planets, a future where our civilization doesn't collapse under the pressure of one world. That's what's at stake. This isn't just a business. This is a mission to save humanity. We are all on this journey together. And I will not back down. The last words hung in the air as he returned to his seat. The jury sat in silence, their expressions hard to read. The prosecution seemed stunned by Musk's unexpected vulnerability. They hadn't anticipated this shift in the trial. They had underestimated Elon Musk. Back aboard the Falcon Heavy, Shailene Woodley and the rest of the crew were well into their long journey toward Mars. They had crossed the halfway point, and despite the isolation, despite the hardships, they were beginning to feel the weight of their mission. They weren't just astronauts. They were pioneers, forging a path for the generations that would follow. "Hey, everyone, check out the view," Ryan said, his voice filled with awe. They had just passed a particularly stunning stretch of space, dark, endless, with distant stars shining brightly. For a moment, the crew was lost in the beauty of the unknown. Shailene smiled, knowing exactly what Ryan meant. This mission, with all its trials, was about something greater than them. It was about charting new territory, both in space and in human history. In the courtroom, the jury deliberated. Elon sat quietly, reflecting on the magnitude of what was happening. His words had been simple, yet they carried the weight of everything he had worked for. The fate of the mission, of SpaceX, of humanity's future, it all hinged on this moment. The hours stretched on as the jury wrestled with the arguments, the evidence, and the emotional weight of the case. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom, and the tension in the air was palpable. "We have reached a verdict," the judge announced. Elon stood tall, his heart racing. The decision had been made. It was out of his hands now. The jury finds the defendant, Elon Musk, not guilty of all charges. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of applause and silence. Elon's legal team rushed to him, but his eyes were distant, still focused on the larger picture. The victory was sweet, but it was only a small part of the bigger mission. There was still work to do. There were still rockets to launch, planets to explore, and humanity's future to secure. Back on the Falcon Heavy, the crew received the news. Cheers erupted across the spacecraft. They knew this victory wasn't just about Elon Musk's legal battle, it was about them, too. They had succeeded in the first phase of the mission. They had fought against the odds, and they had won. Elon Musk had done the unthinkable. He had won in court, and more importantly, he had shown the world that nothing, no trial, no challenge, no setback, could stand in the way of his vision. And with that, humanity's journey to Mars had officially begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?